Jack Mitchell sat in his cluttered office, the walls lined with photos of paranormal encounters and articles about haunted locations. He was flipping through a particularly dense manuscript when his phone buzzed. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but the urgency in the ringtone felt palpable. He answered, "Mitchell speaking." "Mr. Mitchell, this is Agent Thompson from the British government. We need your expertise at Stonehenge immediately. There have been multiple deaths and disappearances." Jack's curiosity was piqued. Stonehenge, huh? Always knew that place was more than a tourist trap. "Who's the team?" "We've arranged for Mia Clark, your tech expert, Zoe Parker, the historian, and a new recruit, Chris Lang. Your flight leaves in 3 hours." Jack hung up, a mix of excitement and dread swirling in his gut. Stonehenge was a hot spot for paranormal activity, but something about this call felt different, more urgent, more dangerous. He packed his gear, making sure to include his trusty EMF meter, thermal camera, and a few extra surprises. At the airport, the team gathered. Mia, with her short-cropped hair and a backpack full of gadgets, gave Jack a nod. Zoe, the historian with a penchant for sarcasm, raised an eyebrow. And Chris, the rookie, looked like he had just stepped out of a college lecture, wide-eyed and eager. "Ready for some ancient ghost hunting?" Jack asked, trying to lighten the mood. "As long as I don't have to touch any cursed artifacts," Mia replied with a smirk. The flight to the UK was uneventful, but the drive to Stonehenge was tense. The landscape grew increasingly eerie, shrouded in mist. They arrived at the monument to find it cordoned off, with Agent Thompson waiting for them. "Thank you for coming. The situation is worse than we thought," Thompson said, his expression grim. "We've lost 3 archaeologists in the last week. Their bodies were found mutilated, and 2 others have vanished without a trace." "Sounds like a party," Zoe muttered. Thompson led them to the excavation site, where the team discovered a set of ancient axes adorned with Celtic symbols. The air around them felt heavy, as if the stones themselves were watching. "These axes were used in dark rituals," Zoe explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were believed to summon entities from another realm." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "Let's set up the equipment and see what we can find." As night fell, the fog thickened. The team spread out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jack's EMF meter spiked, and he called the others over. "We've got activity." Suddenly, shadowy figures materialized around them, whispering in ancient tongues. Chris yelped, nearly dropping his flashlight. "What the hell are those?" "Stay calm," Jack ordered. "They're just trying to scare us." The shadows closed in, and the temperature plummeted. Mia activated the thermal camera, revealing a cluster of cold spots. "They're all around us." One of the shadows lunged at Zoe, who reacted instinctively, swinging her flashlight. It passed through the entity, but the action seemed to disperse it momentarily. "These things aren't just shadows," Jack realized. "There's something else, something older." The team retreated to their base camp, shaken but determined. "We've got to figure out what these entities want and how to stop them," Jack said. "And let's do it before they decide to rip us apart," Chris added, attempting a brave smile but failing. As they reviewed their footage, a pattern emerged. The shadows were drawn to the axes. Zoe pieced together the ancient texts, revealing a chilling truth. The axes were cursed, bound to summon the spirits of those who had been sacrificed with them. "We need to break the curse," Jack said. "And to do that, we need to understand these rituals." The team prepared for another night at Stonehenge, knowing that the real horror was just beginning. The next day, the team returned to the excavation site with renewed determination. The sun barely pierced the fog, casting an otherworldly glow over Stonehenge. Jack and Mia dug through the archaeological notes, while Zoe pored over ancient texts. Chris, still shaken from the previous night, tried to keep a lookout, but his nervous energy was palpable. "According to these notes, the archaeologists found more than just axes," Jack said, holding up a tattered map. "There are reports of burial sites and hidden chambers beneath the stones." Mia adjusted her glasses, peering at the map, If we can find those chambers, we might get more answers. As they followed the map, the atmosphere grew heavier. The ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with a sinister energy. They finally reached a spot marked with an X on the map, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. "Time to get our hands dirty," Zoe said, rolling up her sleeves. They dug for hours, unearthing a stone slab that covered a dark opening. A foul smell emanated from the hole, a mix of decay and something indescribably wrong. "Lovely," Chris muttered. "Ladies first." "Nice try, rookie," Jack said, lowering a rope ladder into the abyss. The team descended into the darkness, their flashlights barely penetrating the thick gloom. The air was cold and damp, echoing with distant whispers. They reached the bottom to find a chamber lined with bones and ancient relics, the walls covered in more Celtic symbols. "This is it," Zoe said, her voice trembling. "This is where the rituals took place." Mia set up her equipment, scanning for any paranormal activity. The EMF meter went wild, and the thermal camera detected numerous cold spots. "We've definitely got something here." As they explored the chamber, Jack noticed a stone altar in the center, adorned with the cursed axes. He reached out to touch one, but Zoe stopped him. "Careful, we don't know what kind of curse we're dealing with." Chris, trying to lighten the mood, quipped, "Yeah, Jack, last thing we need is you becoming a zombie or something." Their laughter was cut short by a sudden, bone-chilling scream echoing through the chamber. The team whipped around, flashlights swinging wildly. Shadows danced along the walls, growing darker and more solid. "Everyone back to the ladder," Jack shouted. As they scrambled to climb out, one of the shadows lunged at Chris, pulling him back. He screamed, struggling to break free. Jack and Mia rushed to help, but the shadow's grip was like ice, freezing their skin on contact. "Hold on, Chris," Zoe yelled, chanting an incantation from her texts. The shadow recoiled, and Jack and Mia pulled Chris to safety. Breathing heavily, they climbed out of the chamber and sealed it shut. "That was too close," Jack said, looking at Chris's pale face. "We need to perform the ritual to break the curse," Zoe said, her voice shaky but resolute. "But we need more information." Back at their base camp, they reviewed their findings. The footage from the chamber revealed more than they had seen with their own eyes. Ghostly figures performing rituals, sacrificing victims with the axes. "This curse is older and stronger than we thought," Jack said. "We need to find a way to perform a counter-ritual." Mia, typing furiously on her laptop, found a lead. "There's an old Celtic shrine nearby, rumored to be a place of purification. If we can perform the ritual there, it might just work." "Then that's our next stop," Jack said. "But we need to be prepared for anything." As they packed their gear, the tension was palpable. The humor that had helped them cope was now replaced by a grim determination. They knew that their journey into the heart of darkness was far from over, and the real horror awaited them at the Celtic shrine. With every step they took, the shadows grew longer, and the sense of impending doom loomed larger. The team was ready to face whatever ancient evil awaited them, determined to end the curse and survive the ordeal. The drive to the Celtic shrine was filled with an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. As they approached the site, the landscape took on a foreboding quality, ancient oak trees looming like silent sentinels. "This place feels wrong," Chris muttered, his eyes darting nervously. "It's supposed to," Zoe replied, checking her notes. "This shrine was once a place of both worship and sacrifice. We need to be careful." The shrine itself was a circle of weathered stones, each inscribed with runes that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. At the center stood a monolithic altar, stained dark with the remnants of ancient blood rituals. "Lovely decor," Mia quipped, setting up her equipment. "Homie." Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He scanned the tree line with his flashlight, catching fleeting glimpses of shadows that disappeared the moment he tried to focus on them. "Let's get this over with," he said, pulling out the ceremonial axes they had recovered. "Zoe, you're up." Zoe took a deep breath and began to chant the counter-ritual, her voice echoing through the clearing. The runes on the stones started to glow, and a chill wind swept through the shrine, carrying whispers of long-dead voices. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and the shadows around them solidified into grotesque, crawling shapes. They slithered towards the team, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly hunger. "Here we go again," Jack said, brandishing one of the axes. "Mia, get the camera rolling. If we don't make it out, someone needs to know what happened." Chris tried to keep his composure as the creatures closed in, but his fear was palpable. One of the entities lunged at him, its form shifting between a crawler and a skinwalker. He swung his flashlight wildly, the beam barely affecting the creature. "Back off, you ugly bastard!" he yelled, stumbling back. Jack swung the axe with all his might, slicing through one of the shadows. It let out an unearthly shriek and dissolved into a puff of black smoke. "They're vulnerable to the axes," he shouted. "Use them." Mia grabbed another axe and joined the fray, her movements precise and calculated. She dispatched one creature after another, her face a mask of determination. Zoe continued her chanting, her voice growing stronger with each verse. As the ritual progressed, the shadows seemed to grow weaker, their forms flickering like dying embers. But the ground continued to shake, and a fissure opened up near the altar, from which a monstrous figure emerged, a towering skeletal being wreathed in darkness. "Well, that's new," Mia said, her tone tinged with sarcasm despite the fear in her eyes. The creature let out a bone-chilling roar and advanced on Zoe, who was still deep in her incantation. Jack and Chris moved to intercept it, swinging their axes with desperate fury. The creature's claws lashed out, catching Jack across the chest and sending him sprawling. "Jack!" Chris shouted, swinging his axe at the creature's leg. It howled in pain and turned its attention to him. Zoe finished the final verse of the ritual, and the runes on the stones flared with blinding light. The creature screamed as its body began to disintegrate, shadows peeling away like layers of rotting flesh. The other entities dissolved into smoke, and the ground stopped trembling. Breathing heavily, the team regrouped at the center of the shrine. Jack winced as he clutched his bleeding chest, but managed a weak smile. "Nice work, everyone. Looks like we lived to fight another day." "Yeah, but for how long?" Chris said, helping Jack to his feet. "That thing was just the tip of the iceberg. We need to find out what's really behind all this." Mia packed up her equipment, her face grim. "Agreed. And next time, let's try not to get nearly killed." As they made their way back to their vehicle, the shadows around the shrine seemed to retreat, but the feeling of being watched remained. They knew that their battle was far from over, and that the true horror lurking in the depths of Stonehenge had yet to reveal itself. Back at their temporary base, a small, dilapidated cottage on the outskirts of Salisbury, the team tended to their wounds and reviewed the footage from the shrine. The atmosphere was tense, each member lost in their own thoughts. Jack sat on an old, creaky chair, wincing as Zoe cleaned and bandaged the gashes across his chest. "That was too close," he muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. "We need to be more prepared." "We're dealing with something ancient and powerful," Zoe said, her tone serious. "These entities aren't just your run-of-the-mill ghosts. There's something much darker." Mia was at the table, her laptop open as she sifted through the video. "Look at this," she said, her eyes wide. She played back the footage from the shrine, focusing on the moment when the creature emerged from the fissure. "That symbol," she pointed to a glowing rune that appeared just before the creature. "I've seen it before in some old texts. It's a summoning sigil, used in ancient Celtic rituals to call forth guardians of the underworld." "Guardians?" Chris asked, his face pale. "More like executioners." "We need to find out who or what is behind this," Jack said, grimacing as he moved to stand. "We need answers." Zoe nodded, rifling through her notes. "There's an old monastery not far from here. It's rumored to have a library filled with ancient texts. If there's any place that could give us more information, it's there." The team set out at dawn, the rising sun casting long shadows across the landscape. The monastery, now abandoned and overgrown, loomed ahead like a specter from the past. Its stone walls were covered in ivy, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Inside, the monastery was a labyrinth of dark corridors and crumbling stonework. The team moved cautiously, their flashlights piercing the gloom. In the main hall, they found rows of dusty, old bookshelves, each filled with ancient tomes. Spread out and look for anything that might be related to summoning rituals or the symbols we saw, Jack instructed. As they searched, a sense of unease settled over them. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building. Mia found a book with a familiar symbol on the cover and called the others over. Here, this might be it. Zoe opened the book, its pages brittle with age. It's written in Old Gaelic. Give me a moment. She carefully translated the text, her face growing more serious with each line. This talks about the ceremonial axes of Stonehenge. They were used in rituals to control the guardians of the underworld. Jack's expression hardened. So, someone is using these axes to summon those creatures? Exactly, Zoe confirmed. But there's more. It mentions a high priest who performed these rituals. If we can find out who that was, we might be able to stop this. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the hall, followed by the sound of dragging footsteps. The team turned, their flashlights revealing a figure shambling towards them. It was an old monk, or rather, what was left of one. His eyes were hollow, and his flesh hung loosely from his bones. Not another one, Chris groaned, raising his flashlight. The monk's mouth opened, and a guttural voice emerged. You should not be here. Jack stepped forward, holding the ceremonial axe. We're here to end this. The monk let out a low, haunting laugh. It is too late. The guardians are awakened. The high priest will rise. Before they could react, the monk dissolved into a cloud of dust, leaving behind an eerie silence. The team exchanged uneasy glances. We need to find that high priest, Jack said. And we need to do it fast. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave the monastery, the feeling of being watched intensified. Shadows danced on the edges of their vision, and the air grew colder. This is far from over, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next, Jack replied, his resolve unwavering. The team knew that the battle was only just beginning. The true horror of Stonehenge was still hidden in the shadows, and it was up to them to uncover it before it was too late. The drive to the supposed resting place of the high priest was fraught with tension. The ancient monastery had provided them with a name, Aaron, the high priest of an ancient Celtic order that had once used Stonehenge as a center of power. His burial site was rumored to be in a secluded forest, miles from the nearest town. I can't believe we're actually doing this, Chris said, his voice betraying his nerves. Hunting down a centuries-old high priest. What could go wrong? Everything, Mia replied dryly, loading fresh batteries into her camera. But when has that ever stopped us? The forest was dense, the path overgrown and seldom traveled. As they approached the coordinates, they found an ancient, moss-covered cairn, its stones worn smooth by time. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay. This must be it, Zoe said, consulting her notes. Aaron's tomb. Jack looked around, his flashlight piercing the gloom. Let's get to work. Keep an eye out for anything unusual. They began to carefully remove the stones, revealing a dark, narrow passageway leading into the earth. The air grew colder as they descended. The walls of the passage lined with ancient runes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. This is it, Zoe said, her voice hushed. The entrance to the tomb. The passage opened into a large, circular chamber. At the center was a stone sarcophagus, its lid carved with intricate symbols. The walls were lined with alcoves, each holding the remains of long-dead priests. The atmosphere was oppressive, a palpable sense of malevolence hanging in the air. Lovely place, Chris muttered, his flashlight sweeping the room. Remind me to book a holiday here. Ignoring the attempt at humor, Jack approached the sarcophagus. Let's get this open. We need to find out if the high priest is really in here. They heaved the heavy stone lid aside, revealing a mummified figure clad in ancient robes. In its hands, it clutched a ceremonial axe, identical to the ones they had recovered. "This is it," Zoe said, reaching for the axe. "This is the source of the power." Before she could touch it, the air grew icy, and a deep, guttural voice echoed through the chamber. "You dare disturb my rest?" The mummified figure sat up, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. The team stumbled back, horror etched on their faces. "Great, just what we needed," Mia said, raising her camera. "A zombie high priest." Aaron stepped out of the sarcophagus, the axe in his hand. "You seek to end what I have begun. You are fools." Jack brandished his axe. "We're here to stop you." Aaron laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion. The Guardians are awake. They will not rest until their task is complete." The ground trembled, and shadows began to coalesce around them, forming into the grotesque shapes of the Guardians. The team readied themselves, axes in hand. "Looks like we're in for a fight," Chris said, his voice shaking but determined. The Guardians lunged at them, their forms shifting and writhing. Jack swung his axe, slicing through one of the creatures, which dissolved into a cloud of black smoke. Zoe and Mia joined the fray, their movements precise and deadly. Aaron watched, his eyes glowing with malevolence. "You cannot defeat them all. My power is eternal." Zoe glared at him, chanting the counter-ritual they had found in the monastery. The runes on the walls began to glow brighter, and the Guardians shrieked in pain. "Keep it up, Zoe," Jack shouted, fending off another attacker. The rune's light intensified, and the Guardians began to disintegrate, their forms unraveling like threads. Aaron howled in rage, his own body starting to break apart. "No, this cannot be!" he screamed, the axe slipping from his grasp. With a final desperate cry, Aaron was consumed by the light, his body disintegrating into ash. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Breathing heavily, the team regrouped. "Is it over?" Chris asked, his voice trembling. "For now," Zoe said, picking up the ceremonial axe. "But we need to make sure this never happens again." With Aaron's defeat, the team returned to Stonehenge, determined to seal the rift once and for all. The ancient site seemed even more foreboding in the twilight, the stones casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. "Let's finish this," Jack said, the ceremonial axe in hand. "We need to close the rift permanently." Zoe nodded, her face set with determination. "We need to perform the counter-ritual here, at the heart of the site. It's the only way to ensure the Guardians are banished for good." They moved to the center of the stone circle, where the air felt thick with energy. Zoe began the ritual, chanting in the ancient tongue as the others stood guard, their eyes scanning the perimeter for any sign of the Guardians. As Zoe's chanting grew louder, the ground began to tremble, and a fissure opened in the center of the circle. Dark, smoky tendrils reached out, trying to escape the rift. "Here we go again," Chris muttered, tightening his grip on his axe. The tendrils solidified into the grotesque forms of the Guardians, their eyes glowing with malevolence. They advanced on the team, their movements fluid and unnatural. "Keep them back," Jack shouted, swinging his axe at the nearest creature. The others followed suit, their weapons slicing through the shadows. Zoe continued her chanting, her voice unwavering despite the chaos around her. The runes on the stones began to glow, their light pushing back the darkness. Mia fought with a ferocity that belied her small frame, her axe cutting through one Guardian after another. "We've got to hold them off until she finishes the ritual." Chris stumbled, nearly losing his footing as a Guardian lunged at him. He swung his axe wildly, catching the creature in its midsection. "Come on, Zoe, hurry up." The rune's light grew blinding, and the ground shook violently. The Guardians shrieked in pain, their forms dissolving into smoke as the rift began to close. With a final, powerful chant, Zoe completed the ritual. The fissure sealed with a thunderous crack, and the remaining guardians disintegrated into nothingness. Panting, the team lowered their weapons, exhaustion etched on their faces. "Did we do it?" Chris asked, his voice hoarse. Zoe nodded, her expression weary but triumphant. "The rift is closed. The guardians are banished." Jack looked around, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. "Let's get out of here. I don't want to stick around to find out if there's a round 3. As they left Stonehenge, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the ancient stones. The battle was over, but the team knew that the scars of the encounter would remain with them forever. "Next time, let's pick a vacation spot with less historical baggage," Mia said with a weak smile. Jack laughed, a sound of relief and fatigue. "Agreed. But for now, let's just focus on getting home." As they drove away, the shadows of Stonehenge receded, but the memory of the fight would linger, a reminder of the darkness that once threatened to consume them. The relief of closing the rift was short-lived. As the team drove away from Stonehenge, a sudden and inexplicable sense of dread washed over them. The air inside the vehicle grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist with malevolent intent. "Anyone else feel like we're not alone?" Mia asked, glancing around nervously. Chris nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Yeah, it's like someone's watching us." Jack checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadowy figure following them. "Just keep driving. We're almost back to town." The journey back was fraught with tension, each creak and groan of the car heightening their anxiety. As they neared the outskirts of the town, the road became eerily deserted, and a thick fog rolled in, obscuring their view. "Great, just what we need," Chris muttered. A horror movie fog. Suddenly, the car's engine sputtered and died. They coasted to a stop, the silence pressing in around them. "Now what?" Zoe asked, her voice edged with frustration. Jack got out of the car and popped the hood. "I'll take a look. Keep an eye out for anything weird." Mia and Zoe exchanged worried glances, their flashlights cutting through the fog. The night was unnaturally quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures conspicuously absent. As Jack tinkered with the engine, a low growl emanated from the darkness. Mia swung her flashlight toward the sound, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Zoe nodded, her grip on her flashlight tightening. "Stay close." From the mist emerged a creature unlike any they had encountered. A skinwalker, its eyes glowing with a predatory light. It moved with unnatural speed, its form shifting and contorting as it approached. "Jack, hurry up!" Chris shouted, fumbling for his axe. The skinwalker lunged, and Chris barely managed to deflect its attack. The creature snarled, its features warping grotesquely. "Get back in the car!" Jack yelled, slamming the hood shut. The team scrambled into the vehicle, locking the doors. The skinwalker clawed at the windows, its eyes burning with rage. "Drive, Chris!" Zoe screamed. Chris turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He floored the accelerator, the car speeding away from the creature. It chased them for a few moments before fading into the fog, its howls echoing in the night. Breathing heavily, the team stared straight ahead, the terror of the encounter still fresh. "That was too close," Mia said, her voice shaking. Zoe nodded. "We need to find somewhere safe to regroup." They drove through the fog until they reached a small, abandoned cottage on the outskirts of town. The structure was dilapidated, but it offered some semblance of shelter. "Better than nothing," Jack said, leading the way inside. The interior was musty and filled with cobwebs, but it was secure. They barricaded the doors and windows, setting up a makeshift camp in the main room. "We need a plan," Chris said, his face pale. "Those things are getting bolder." Zoe nodded, consulting her notes. "There might be a way to banish them permanently, but we need to find the source of their power." "Great," Mia said, slumping against the wall. "Another wild goose chase." Jack sighed. "It's our only option. Let's rest for now. We'll figure it out in the morning." As they settled in for the night, the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the occasional distant howl. They knew the worst was yet to come. Morning brought little relief. The fog had lifted, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. After a quick breakfast of energy bars and coffee, the team gathered to discuss their next move. "I found a reference to a forgotten ritual in my notes," Zoe said, spreading out a map on the floor. "It mentions a place called the Whispering Grove, not far from here. It might be the source of the Skinwalker's power." "Whispering Grove," Chris echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like a great place for a picnic." "More like a death trap," Mia muttered. "But it's our best shot." They packed their gear and set out on foot, the forest thick and foreboding. The path to the grove was overgrown, branches snagging at their clothes as if trying to hold them back. "Watch your step," Jack warned, his axe at the ready. These woods have a bad reputation. As they approached the grove, the air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over them. The trees seemed to whisper, their leaves rustling with secrets long forgotten. "There it is," Zoe said, pointing to a clearing up ahead. The Whispering Grove. The clearing was dominated by a stone altar, its surface covered in ancient runes. The air was thick with an almost tangible energy, and the ground seemed to hum beneath their feet. "This is it," Zoe said, consulting her notes. "We need to perform the ritual here to banish the Skinwalkers." "Let's get to it then," Jack said, taking his position by the altar. Zoe began to chant, her voice steady and strong. The runes on the altar glowed faintly, and the ground trembled. As the ritual progressed, shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, coalescing into the forms of Skinwalkers. "They're coming," Mia warned, raising her axe. Chris and Jack took up defensive positions, their weapons ready. The Skinwalkers advanced, their eyes glowing with malevolence. "Keep them back," Zoe shouted, her chanting never faltering. The first Skinwalker lunged at Jack, who swung his axe in a wide arc, slicing through the creature. It dissolved into smoke, but more took its place. Chris fought with a newfound determination, his axe biting into the flesh of the attackers. "How many of these things are there?" "Too many," Mia replied, dispatching another Skinwalker. "We need to buy Zoe more time." The rune's glow intensified, and the ground shook violently. Zoe's chanting reached a crescendo, her voice echoing through the grove. With a final, powerful incantation, the runes flared brightly, and a wave of energy pulsed outward, knocking the Skinwalkers off their feet. The creatures howled in agony as their forms began to disintegrate. "It's working," Jack shouted, fending off one last attacker. The Skinwalkers dissolved into smoke, their howls fading into the distance. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the grove fell silent. Breathing heavily, the team regrouped around the altar. "Did we do it?" Chris asked, his voice shaky. Zoe nodded, her face pale but triumphant. "The ritual is complete. The Skinwalkers are banished." Mia slumped to the ground, exhausted. "Good, because I don't think I could have fought off another wave." Jack looked around, the tension slowly easing from his shoulders. "Let's get out of here before something else shows up." As they made their way back through the forest, the sunlight filtering through the trees seemed warmer, more welcoming. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the memory of the battle would stay with them forever. "Next time," Chris said with a weary smile, "let's pick a mystery that doesn't involve ancient curses and supernatural creatures." Zoe laughed softly. "Agreed, but knowing us, we'll probably end up right back in the thick of it." Jack clapped him on the back. "For now, let's just enjoy the peace and quiet." As they walked away from the Whispering Grove, the shadows receded, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The danger had passed, but the legend of the ceremonial axes and the ancient Celtic power would live on. The team's victory was short-lived. As they returned to the town, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. The streets were empty, and an eerie silence hung in the air. It felt as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. "This isn't right," Zoe said, her eyes scanning the deserted streets. "Where is everyone?" Chris tightened his grip on his axe. "Stay alert. This feels like a trap." They made their way to the town square, where a crowd of people had gathered. At first glance, it seemed like a normal gathering, but as they got closer, they realized the townspeople were in a trance, their eyes vacant and their movements mechanical. "What's going on here?" Jack whispered, his heart pounding. Before anyone could answer, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was a tall man dressed in ancient Celtic robes, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Welcome, intruders," the man said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "You have disrupted the balance, and now you must pay the price." "Who are you?" Mia demanded, raising her flashlight. The man smiled, a cold and cruel expression. "I am the guardian of the ceremonial axes, and you have unleashed a power you do not understand." "We banished the skinwalkers," Zoe said, her voice trembling. "We did what was necessary. You only delayed the inevitable," the guardian replied. "The true power of the axes lies in their ability to control the living and the dead. And now, you will witness their full potential." With a wave of his hand, the guardian summoned a wave of spectral warriors, their ghostly forms materializing from the ether. The townspeople, still in their trance, began to move towards the team with hostile intent. "Get ready," Jack shouted, raising his axe. "We've got company." The team fought desperately, their weapons clashing with the spectral warriors. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, the clang of metal against metal and the eerie wails of the undead. Zoe continued to chant incantations, trying to weaken the Guardian's hold on the townspeople. "Keep them off me. I need more time." Chris and Mia fought side by side, their axes flashing in the dim light. "We can't hold them off forever," Chris yelled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We don't have to," Mia replied, determination in her eyes. Just long enough for Zoe to finish the spell. As the battle raged on, Jack noticed something strange. The Guardian seemed to be drawing power from the ceremonial axes, which were embedded in the ground at his feet. "Zoe, focus on the axes. They're his source of power." Zoe nodded, directing her incantations towards the axes. The runes on the blades began to glow, and the Guardian's control over the townspeople weakened. "No!" the Guardian screamed, his eyes burning with rage. "You cannot defeat me." With a final, powerful incantation, Zoe shattered the Guardian's connection to the axes. The spectral warriors dissolved into mist, and the townspeople collapsed, free from their trance. The Guardian, now powerless, fell to his knees. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." "We'll be ready," Jack said, his voice cold and resolute. The Guardian disappeared in a flash of light, leaving the team standing in the now silent town square. They were battered and bruised, but victorious. The sun was beginning to rise as the team made their way back to their vehicle. The town was slowly coming back to life, the townspeople awakening from their trance and trying to make sense of what had happened. "We did it," Mia said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Chris nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's get out of here before something else happens." As they drove away from the town, the weight of their victory settled over them. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged victorious, but the scars would remain. Back at their headquarters, they debriefed and tended to their wounds. The atmosphere was somber, each member lost in their thoughts. "We need to be prepared," Zoe said finally, breaking the silence. The Guardian's warning was clear. "This isn't over." "We'll be ready," Jack replied, his eyes steely. "But for now, we need to rest and regroup." The team disbanded for the night, each member retreating to their quarters. Jack, however, found himself unable to sleep. He wandered the halls of their headquarters, his mind racing with thoughts of the battle and the Guardian's ominous warning. As he passed by Zoe's room, he noticed the door was ajar. He knocked softly and entered, finding her poring over ancient texts and scrolls. "Can't sleep either?" Jack asked, taking a seat beside her. Zoe shook her head. "I'm trying to find more information about the ceremonial axes and the Guardian. There has to be more to this." "We'll figure it out," Jack said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We always do." As they worked late into the night, a sense of camaraderie and determination grew stronger. They were a team, bound by their shared experiences and their commitment to protecting the world from supernatural threats. The following day, they received a call from the government, commending them on their success and providing new resources for their future missions. It was a small victory, but a significant one. "We have to stay vigilant," Chris said during their next meeting. "The Guardian might have been defeated, but there are always more threats out there." Mia nodded. "Agreed. Let's take what we've learned and be ready for whatever comes next."